Hey folks, you've got Shannon Murphy here. I'm joined by Stephen Hilt, Senior Threat Researcher at Trend Micro, and today we're going to talk about Netflix's Zero Day limited series starring Robert De Niro, and we're going to go through, um, what was realistic in the show, what was maybe extra dramatic or had a little bit of that Hollywood magic sprinkled in, and what really just made no sense at all. And we'll be a little bit generous, I think, Stephen, with
Yeah.
the showrunners, and really try and see what should people be concerned about, what are kind of maybe the tactics available to defend, and then what's also maybe going through the mind of the adversary kind of throughout. So if that sounds good to everyone, let's jump in. Stephen, core premise of the show is what? It's 1 0 day, I believe, is exploited and it's affecting a lot of different critical
Yep.
infrastructure. Maybe just kind of walk us through like what happens.
So yeah, in the show, there's this one giant vulnerability that you never really learn much information about, at least in the first few episodes that we've made it through, about the vulnerability itself and how it happens. All you gather from the first few episodes is that it affected everything, regardless of what operating system it was. And
That's it, right?
that's kind of one of the first like deviations that's not really realistic. In theory, it's possible, but
I think they mentioned
practicality.
Android, Mac, iOS, SCADA was on there, and this they were all equally affected by this same 0 day.
Yeah, that's correct. It was if you compare those systems, the amount of code that's probably they share is like that scenario is not super realistic. However, for a dramatic effect, yeah, it worked for the show, I guess.
If we were to say, certainly critical infrastructure is top target for APT groups. So it's not uncommon for things like, telecommunications to be targeted, but certainly the scale,
Yeah.
breadth of the targeting for this. I think when we were chatting about this earlier, we were talking about the street lights as an example, as being, communicated as like sort of this connected device, which in your experience, these are typically quite isolated
Yeah, I mean, you
systems.
know, it was one of those moments where, you're watching the train control systems having problems and airplanes are falling out of the sky and traffic lights are having problems and your phone has a message on it saying, this
We're
is going
coming
to happen.
back. Yeah.
Yeah, we're coming back. Like the practicality of that and the amount of effort it would take to pull off an attack like that is definitely large scale.
Yeah, above and beyond.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's take a look at, so this is the exploitation, and then there was an actual malware as well. So I recall episode 2, we see this idea of like a dormant malware that was kind of like reawoken whenever the attacker wanted, and that was kind of the threat of like, hey, we're turning things back on, but like we could do this again whenever we wanted. And we were chatting, and if we were being super generous, that there are maybe some slight real world parallels here to something like VPN filter.
Yeah, that's
And you had brought that up as not necessarily polymorphic, which is very trendy right now, but maybe something a little bit more modular.
yeah, so the tie we were talking about, that VPN filter itself was a nation state malware that was attacking routers. And there was a method in which it could be, even if it lost C2 communications, you could point it to new control servers to by issuing a new command to it and telling it to go somewhere else. So the idea, and when we researched this after many years, is that it still exists on these routers, so it could be awoken at any moment in time if the threat actor wanted to do it. Then we were disproven on that theory a couple months after we released that because the same threat actor group came out with a whole new router malware that was known as Cyclops Blink. So yeah, it was interesting because there is some kind of parallels where it's tried to do something like this, like that router malware also was looking for industrial control systems on the back end, but also looking for other things. So, I think they probably leverage something like VPN filter as kind of like the creative idea behind this.
Inspiration. Yeah.
Yeah, the inspiration behind this entire attack.
Right. And then from from a security perspective, when we are looking for these types of things in real life, or we're taking a detection and response or extended detection and response approach, from my perspective, like the things that you kind of want to have in your toolkit are things like network telemetry, to have forensic investigation, to be able to look at these different artifacts, or if something is kind of coming offline and online within the environment. From your perspective, when we are thinking real life security, are these the types of things that you want to have in place?
Yeah, for you definitely want to have the ability to piece together what happened through network telemetry and log data and things like that. That was actually one of those things that drove me crazy about the show is they didn't deep dive into actually them figuring out what the malware was. They just said it's
I'm not sure
dormant.
that they have yet. Yeah, at least through episodes 1 through 3. I'm not sure that they're totally 100%
Yeah,
sure with what
yeah,
they're
I
dealing
don't.
with here. Yeah.
I was expecting, not
Yeah.
if I was making the show, a lot of people probably wouldn't watch it because it would be a bunch of people reverse engineering the actual malware that they
Well, yeah,
found.
that's a great question. Like, kind of, if you were, on Robert De Niro's team, you were working this case, what would that first kind of 24 hours look like for you?
Yeah, so you would have to, a lot of parallels from an incident response aspect were there. You set up the incident commander, you start triaging what happens, you try to recover services, and then you try to figure out more and more details about what it is, and and how to fix it and prevent it. I mean, the whole concept of it being a 0 day is just a 0 day is a vulnerability that is unknown to the vendor.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, so who is the vendor that it's affecting? What is the vulnerability? How do we patch the vulnerability? Those are the like immediate steps that you're trying to figure out.
This brings us to kind of an interesting parallel because, to your point, most of the show wasn't really focused on what is it. It was really focused on who is it. And that was a big theme from a nation state activity perspective, which I think for a general audience is really compelling to learn about those types of dynamics and how attribution happens. And of course, in this show, they're pretty much immediately pointing to Russia, and we certainly know there are APT groups out of that region. And
Correct.
typically, what we're seeing from an APT perspective is, long-term persistence, information gathering,
Yep.
these types of living off the land, techniques that are hard to spot. But but I think what was maybe a little bit inconsistent was the level of destruction. But what were kind of your thoughts on that nation state storyline and influence coming through there?
That's really so. As working on a team that does kind of the threat research angles of it, there's a big danger to jumping to attribution.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think we're gonna find, I think they're gonna probably play with that in the show, where the attribution, they may be wrong on it. They jump to an attribution problem. That's just my early feelings, just because when you jump to those conclusions, on attribution without actually all the data and facts behind it, you're usually wrong because there's usually
Yeah,
false indicators and things like that that are immediately you have to understand the group. And also in a lot of the cases, and I don't know if that's the case in this show or not, but if you are infected by one group, there is a likelihood that you may be infected by other groups as well. So you may be crossing some of those attribution paths. And so
sure.
I'm still waiting to see if that's, like something they're going to play with in this show or not.
Sort of like when you try to back into your thesis without actually doing the research up front. So everything you're kind of looking for things to sort of almost like a confirmation bias to confirm that your initial attribution is correct. Whereas if you do that, you might actually be missing some pretty important clues
Yeah,
along the
that's a hard
way.
thing in research anyways.
Yeah.
The confirmation bias is
Yeah.
you don't want to come at it with a bias. So, and I think when it comes to attribution, if you jump to that, sometimes it doesn't even do you any good to know who it was
Sure.
before,
Yeah.
long before you even know how to fix it,
And clean up
uh,
the mess. Yeah.
and clean up the mess.
Priority number one, clean up the mess.
Correct.
So that's interesting. I guess maybe from a reality check perspective, when we are looking at this kind of a little bit more sensationalized storyline. What do you think the show kind of got right about nation state operations, and what did they kind of get wrong throughout that kind of episode two storyline?
From looking into like those, uh, if it's a nation state or a cybercrime group, pulling off that coordinated attack obviously would have to be of some kind of nation state. And you can
Mm-hmm.
look to even recent events where there's been supply chain issues in, with the pager systems that happened last year.
Yes,
That
yeah,
there is some parallels that they're drawing from in the show,
from
specifically
real life, yeah.
towards real life and
Mm-hmm.
events. So, and as I said, that would be more of like to get the supply chain into all of those places. That's You're gonna have to pull off a nation state level attack.
For sure. And of course, like nation state APT groups still continue to be like the largest purchaser of zero-day vulnerabilities and exploits as well.
Yeah.
We're certainly seeing, more cyber criminal groups as well having the funding to do that now, but I think for this zero day be particularly expensive in
Yeah,
order to either identify or buy.
yeah, and the big thing with cyber criminals, like why I wouldn't believe who's behind this to be an actual cyber criminal group, is because what is the financial motivation? That
Exactly, true.
there is
Yeah.
shutting off the whole world does not give you a financial
Benefit.
yeah, we didn't see a ransom like, oh, pay us $1 trillion or
Right.
we'll do this again in 24 hours. It was, we'll be back.
Right, right, yeah. So there were some kind of, yeah, clear indicators and inspiration from real life as well. I think another area where we saw some inspiration, and that this is kind of encouraging in some sense, but it's also a requirement. But it also showed, I mean, the whole show is centered around the US federal government response to a major cyber crisis. That's great. And we've certainly seen more coming out from federal governments around the world, executive orders in the US around cybersecurity and, regulation and requirements and investment in zero trust and all of these different themes. So that's really great. But how did you see kind of this real world, critical infrastructure attack depicted in the show? How realistic was that to you? And the level of kind of seriousness that it was being taken at.
So I think the level of seriousness, if something major like this happened, you would want somebody like Robert De Niro's character, who I think Robert De Niro is saving the show right now. Uh, but that character is the person you'd want to help guide and say, like, to lead an effort like this. And that's what you would need, is somebody to come in, play a crucial role in that, to drive collaboration, because you can't just have the government out, a single point of the government investigating this. You're going to need a lot of private industry like us at Trend Micro would probably be involved at some point in time in something like this, trying to help figure out what was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of an interesting point too from the trend perspective, and even looking at things like Zero Day Initiative and how that real organization is helping federal governments around the world actually identify these vulnerabilities up front before others have the opportunity to
Yeah.
exploit them, and kind of benefiting the research community as well, giving them an incentive to participate in more of this white hat research and vulnerability research as well.
100%. It's one of the best things about working, in the private industry over, a government, is you get to be a little more flexible, and we get to help out so many different verticals trying to help solve security issues.
Totally. I think maybe last topic before we start to sign off here was around a really interesting conversation right now around things like privacy, social media platforms, the role of technology companies in security and privacy, and kind of the different dynamics we've been seeing there. Something that I'm super interested in is facial recognition. And
Yeah.
we saw kind of this theme start to come out a little bit around surveillance and, kind of what are the privacy issues? What are people concerned about? How far reaching, should these organizations be? for like what is the balance to strike there, I think is particularly a salient topic right now.
Yeah, I think from the privacy technology and even with the social media angles is
Hmm.
very relevant, especially to privacy today.
Well,
And
even UK government, right? They just
yeah,
were asking for, even a few weeks ago, asking for backdoor access to encrypted data from iPhones, right? So, like
right.
that is a new dynamic that's kind of emerging right now as well.
Yeah, to me, that angle for the privacy was probably one of the most realistic that pulled it, the how people are feeling,
Hmm.
because I think there was the scene where to the point where like they're just following you people around with drones, and that's not really something that would happen, but that's what people fear
Yeah,
is
for
what's going
sure.
to happen is that you could just fly, get around and see who the person is and those kinds of things. I think it was just really interesting how they were really pulling at that aspect of privacy through the social media, people oversharing and trying to play with that privacy angle throughout the first few episodes, anyway.
Yeah, I know. I think that it is certainly worthwhile for people to be really educated on and understand, what their rights are online and how they can, kind of manage their own privacy and also kind of what dynamics are emerging where you do have a little bit less control in making decisions that make sense for you, right? Like
Yep.
Clearview AI is a great example of a super far-reaching company, particularly in the US. If you travel to any US airport, you're, logged into that database for sure. So there are kind of things that there's trade-offs and then there's choices that we can make as well to have a
Right.
little bit more control
Yeah, in
as
a lot of
well.
cases, the privacy comes down to privacy versus convenience. So sometimes
Hmm.
it's convenient, but you get your privacy kind of taken away. So yeah,
Yeah, you're not necessarily paying in, dollars and cents, but you're paying in that convenience
yep.
factor. So I guess as we're starting to wrap up here, kind of quick recap, key takeaways. What do you think from the first three episodes? What do you think people should be concerned about? What do they not really need to worry about? And kind of what are your predictions for next few episodes coming up here? No
Yeah.
spoilers though.
Yeah. So I have no idea on the next from a stance. I think at any point in time they're just going to throw us
Another wrench, yeah.
yeah, some wrenches in the cogs, and things are just not going to go exactly like I think. I have a prediction of what's going to happen, but in the style of these types of shows, we're being led astray, so they'll come back. It'll be something else, and I'm excited to see what that is. But my major takeaway right now is something like this probably would never happen. It would take very coordinated attack to be this widespread. I also was really interested in the fact that it only seems to affect in the show the United States and
Yes.
no other countries.
Which
So
is
do
like
we?
that vulnerability is going to exist
Yeah.
anywhere. Yeah.
So then the question is, are we only focusing on the US? Did it happen somewhere else? And that's just going to become part of another part of the story, or what's going on with that? I don't know. So that's kind of things that I'm looking forward to in the next episode that we can talk about again shortly, hopefully.
Awesome. Yeah. I think for me, kind of key takeaways from this is yes, critical infrastructure, big target, that's reality. And, there's lots of things that we can do in those types of environments to get ahead, whether we're looking at special network telemetry, whether we're looking at, legacy operating systems or OT or IoT device and just making sure we've got the right coverage. I think as any individual citizen watching the show, certainly, lots of different ways that you can take care of yourself online, that you can be proactive and take care of yourself in that sense. But certainly, practicing good hygiene is always great. But overwhelmingly, I don't think folks need to be too worried about this scale of attack and the impact to their day to day. So. Certainly some real risk out there in the world, but definitely don't be too fearful of something like this happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely, which is let's bring it back down. The risks are there. The scale of this risk the is being blown out of portion for TV entertainment. And I'm for one kind of enjoying it, but you have to realize for those who aren't super technical, may actually think some scenarios like this may be real.
Yeah, like that. What was that radio show with the aliens? Everyone freaked out. Anyways.
Oh, War of the Worlds.
Yeah. Maybe it's a little bit like that. But you know what? At the end of the day, I think any mainstream media covering cyber topics is always super interesting and great for people to get excited and to start
Yep.
getting interested in these types of things. Thank you, Stephen, so much for joining, chatting through this kind of book
Yeah.
club for TV with me. We will be talking through episodes 4 to 6, 4, 5, 6 next. It's a limited series, only 6 episodes. So thanks for joining us for part one. Please come back for part two when we figure out what's actually going on in the US here with this big 0 day vulnerability.